Hi there, my name is Bob the Veil Guy, and today I wanted to set up an encounter that I'm going to show you, which stresses the importance of the characteristics of a radar detector that you should be looking for before you buy one, and certainly how to drive with one. You're going to be looking for a radar detector that has the greatest sensitivity that you can get, as well as quickness to alert to instant on radar, which is what this encounter that I'm going to be showing you is, as well as good filtering. So the quickness and the sensitivity work to your advantage as opposed to punishing you with excessive false alerts. And a good example here I'm going to show you is the new Uniden R3 and its non-GPS version, the R1. Both of these detectors are showing to have the greatest sensitivity that I've ever driven with, and that's since 1978, so that's almost 40 years. So what Uniden has done here is to make these radar detectors perfect for the type of encounter that we're going to be showing you briefly. Now, with an extreme radar detector, you'll see other encounters or videos online, including some of our own, that show multi-mile detections to what is called constant on police radar. That is a radar unit that is left in a continuously transmitting mode. And when a vehicle, or if you happen to be speeding, or even if you're not, you come into the capture range, so to speak, of the police radar, which is, typically less than 1,000 feet, he can get your speed. But if you're driving with a radar detector, you're going to get those warnings well before he has the ability to get your speed. Now, that can diminish that distance around curves. So even if he has it on constant on, you're not going to get as long of a distance detection as you would if it were just straight down the road. Also, if there's a lot of foliage around, you'll tend to get decreased detection range. So certainly sensitivity can help you in that regard. But the most important aspect of a radar detector is in detections that when you really need them. That is when miles become literally feet. So we're going to use an example in the state of Pennsylvania, which is where I live. And the funny thing about Pennsylvania is a unique state in the country that only the state police are allowed to operate, or permitted by law to operate, radar. They can also only use K-band, which is an older radar that came essentially after X-band. So we've seen K-band since the 80s. K-band works on a lower frequency of 24.15 gigahertz. And generally, those units are older. But the state police in Pennsylvania recently got a contract with what is called very low power radar, which means even though the radar is transmitting, it is low power. So it brings the capture range, which they can get your speed closer, but it actually works to the advantage of the police officer or the trooper, because the ability to detect that radar is greatly diminished as opposed to some of the other videos where I showed you, even with KA, where you can get multi-mile detections because the signal strength that it's transmitting is so high. Think of that as the equivalent of a high-powered radio station that you can pick up on your radio farther away than what you could with, let's say, a weaker radio station, like you'll often see with college stations that have not as much power, so you have to be closer to the source. So that's pretty much what it has to do with power. The other thing that makes it even harder is, as you will see in this video that I'm going to be setting up for you in this discussion, is if they do not shoot pretty much down the road, the direction that you're coming at. So when you have a radar unit transmitting pretty much in, going against the line of traffic, you can also pick that up at a greater distance. So just about any detector that you buy today, from Whistler, Cobra, Rodenso, Beltronics Escort, and of course Uniden, and Valentine, of course, I can't forget to mention them, are going to provide you with plenty of detection and alerting range to constant on radar. And effectively, too, constant on radar is operated either in a moving mode in most states or in a stationary mode, and they would do that from a hidden position. Now, that can get more lethal as you've seen in some of the other videos, if you watch them with the Uniden at night, where oftentimes a police trooper will, or a patrol vehicle will set up in a parking lot off to the side of the road a little bit, and at night where you can't see them, and then shoot that radar down. And you'll often see those kinds of traps in secondary roads, where the highway could be 65 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour, and then as you approach a town, a lot of local yokels will do this technique, not so much state troopers. And then that speed can drop from 55 to 45 to 35 quickly. And if you're not attentive to that, you could, they count on that to stumble into some of these types of traps at higher speed, and of course you're going to get a ticket in those cases. So it's not to say constant on can't be lethal, but if you have, pretty much any radar detector, you're going to get alerted to that well before. So some of these more sensitive radar detectors, like the Uniden R1 or R3, are going to give you plenty of sensitivity, more reaction time that you're going to need. So going back to I/O, the real challenge that the state police are trained to do is it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to see radar used in instant on from an ambush hidden position. That's pretty much how the state police are trained, and I would say they are some of the best and most skillful radar operators in the entire country. So just be cautious and cognizant of that if you're driving in the state of Pennsylvania, particularly at night. And what the state police will do that's even more challenging on a radar detector is to, as I was saying earlier, not shoot down the road, but shoot across the road. So the beam, instead of hitting the antenna straight on from a long distance, actually goes across the road. And if you've ever been on a boat and you're, in a bay or something like that, and another boat goes by you, the weight that's left by the engine of that boat, you may not feel that wake or see that wake as it spreads out, as it gets farther away from the boat, until you hit that across that threshold until it comes your way. So those types of police encounters are the most lethal. You'll see similar types of setups, automated enforcement in Europe, called GATSO, where they're using a radar that's called polarized, which even makes it harder on a radar detector. Low power and across the street as well on an angle. So all those things make it extremely difficult. That's where a sensitive radar detector that is quick to alert to these brief detections of radar, because they're only going to transmit for short periods of time, comes into play. So insofar as sensitivity is concerned, a detector that has, let's say, 3 dB, which is what you measure sensitivity in, and that's a logarithmic scale, basically translates into the potential of a 50% greater distance than a detector that has 3 dB less sensitivity. A detector that has, let's say, 6 dB of greater sensitivity, you have the potential to detect that from twice as far as a detector that has, 6 dB less. So just to put that in context of math and how detection and transmission works. And with some of these videos that we recently did, those it suggests that the Uniden R1 and R3, in fact, has 6 dB sensitivity gains, particularly on 35.5 Ka, and that's borne out with relative, let's say, to a Max 360, where we got a detection of 1.6 miles to this constant on source versus 3.3 miles. So that almost comes out to exactly 6 dB. So anyway, as I said, that's more than you're going to need for constant on radar. But those 6 dBs are going to translate into something that is very critical, which is to picking up potentially an instant on shot where the officer transmits briefly to get a speed and then turns it off, so people with detectors can't pick them up. And when you're measuring those distances in feet, so we have one video in particular that we just published up on YouTube, where we set up a real-world scenario where there were 3 sets of vehicles ahead of us that were going through a trap, an I/O trap at night, hidden, ambush. and the R3 was able to pick it up from somewhat of a distance, but certainly not miles and miles and miles. So having said that, when you're driving at night with a radar detector, be very cognizant of the fact that if you're the only one driving alone, even the most sensitive radar detector will not save you from an IO trap if you haven't gotten the advanced warnings of a trigger pull. So when you're driving, one of the things we recommend is to always try to, what I call a slingshot effect, off of a potential vehicle that you see ahead of you on the tail lights. And if you don't see any, be very cautious until you reacquire somebody's headlights, figuring that they're going to get shot, and then you're going to be alerted to it. So having said all that, if you followed all this, let's get to this encounter, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, as it turns out, there is a Pennsylvania state trooper, if he's still up here, running. We got low power K band, and I was picking up some K, and I thought it to be at first a drone sign, because we have some construction up here. But then I thought about it. I said, you know what? Too strong, because there's not one in this particular stretch, and sure enough, off to the right is a state trooper. First time I've seen him there, hiding in the cover of the night. So if he's still up here, he targets these other cars ahead of me.
Police reported ahead.
Yep, look at that, even Waze. Somebody marked it on Waze. Here we go.
K-band.
There he is. Lethal. Okay, now, as we look at this encounter, you'll notice that the first detection was very weak, and the Uniden is showing 1 bar or 1 tick. We're about 1,000 feet, if not a little less, from where the officer actually is shooting. So if you think about that versus a detection that you've seen at, let's say, 3.3 miles, where you get an initial 1 bar or a brief glimpse of radar, versus 1,000 feet or less. And you're doing that with a detector that has that level of sensitivity. Well, if another detector in the constant O scenario, the constant on scenario, can only detect at, let's say, 1.5 miles or half the distance to that constant on source because of the less sensitivity that it has. Well, that would also translate to this encounter here, where it's only at 1,000 feet. So it's quite possible, and perhaps even likely, that a lesser sensitive detector wouldn't even be able to detect that initial IO shot or instant on shot at that 1,000-foot distance. And what does that mean? Well, it means your detector doesn't go off. You don't know he's there. Now, in case we happen to have Waze, so we knew he was somewhere, but we didn't know he was actually there, let's say. But you wouldn't even get that advance notice to even react to slow down. And within a matter of seconds, you're getting hit with that instant on trap. So I hope this example demonstrates how important it is to have a sensitive detector, and really where it comes into play. And it's in these types of scenarios. So I hope this video was informative to you, and if it was, please give us a thumbs up and share the video with your friends. And be sure to subscribe if you're not already to the YouTube channel. And be sure to visit radarbusters.com. They have expert support staff that can help you determine what are the best countermeasure solutions for your particular driving